I did a little digging. I wanted to answer Jim Wilkinson's question about the biblical Hebrew word for evil. So evil is the English word we use. Let me share my screen here and we'll take a look at that word. What is the biblical Hebrew word? I say biblical Hebrew because there is a modern Hebrew that's not exactly like biblical Hebrew. So what is the modern or the biblical word for Hebrew? The word most commonly translated into the word evil is this very short word, rosh. So look at Proverbs 8:13, for example. We're going to be in this chapter tonight, so. And I'm curious what it's going to say in various versions. 8:13.
Fear of the Lord is to hate evil.
There you go. That's what my Common English Bible says? Is that what the King James says?
Yep. Maybe.
Okay, NIV. All right. Now, I read a very interesting article about whether or not that's a good translation of the word rosh. So that's why I mentioned here semantic range. Let's look at some of these other scriptures to see how this Hebrew word is used in these texts. So let's divvy this up and maybe go a little bit quicker. Would someone read Jeremiah 24:2? And I hope I got these references correct because I basically just lifted them out of an article that I was reading.
Okay, this is the King James Version. One basket had very good figs, even like the figs that are first ripe, and the other basket had very naughty figs, which could not be eaten. They were so bad.
Okay, typically, so that's the good figs and typically it's rotten figs. That's funny. King James says naughty. Well, the word for rotten or naughty, Joanne, what was your version?
It says very poor.
Very poor, okay, well, that's lame. Anyway, so the word for rotten or naughty is actually this Hebrew word rosh. So, you can't, when we use the word evil, we would not think of bad figs as evil. So that's.
But we might think of something being rotten.
Yeah, but that's why this scholar that I was reading says maybe evil isn't the best way to translate this word. So we're trying to get to some sort of conceptual clarity here. How about Proverbs 25:19? Somebody look it up. Would someone look up Nehemiah 2:2?
I got that.
You got Nehemiah?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I've got Proverbs.
Okay, Jim?
Like a bad tooth or a lame foot is reliance on the unfaithful in times of trouble.
Okay, a bad tooth. The word bad there in English is the Hebrew word rosh. So a bad tooth. Again, there's no moral agency. Typically, when we think of evil, we either think of like natural disasters, an earthquake, a flood, or tragic accidents. I remember, when I was thinking about this, back when I was in pastoral ministry, the first go around before we went into college work, I was the pastor of a town up in McPherson County, Kansas, and 3 kids in a car, the driver of the car, 16 years old, sophomore in high school, doing nothing wrong, driving an older car without seatbelts. So this is a while back, but I'm almost positive the old car she was driving did not have seatbelts. Driving to school, not speeding, not acting up. The highway had the kind of shoulder where it drops off a little bit, and she overcorrected and rolled the car. She died. The other 2 kids were basically fine. She died. The driver of the car died. There's just no, you can think of a lot of scenarios in which teenagers are acting foolish and they do something stupid and with tragic consequences. This was just just, an inexperienced driver making a mistake. Tragic accidents like that. We don't think of them as evil. Well, we don't think of them as morally evil, but they are evil in that sense. Or, yeah. And then moral intentions, of course, or actions. That's where we really most often think of the word evil. And in these cases, moral intent isn't involved at all. Okay, Billy, Nehemiah 2:2.
Okay, it says, the king asked me, why do you seem sad? Since you aren't sick, you must have a broken heart.
Oh,
That doesn't fit in at all.
Right, right. So, but the Hebrew word rosh is used in this passage. Read it again,
Broken heart?
Billy.
The king asked me, why do you seem sad? Since you aren't sick, you must have a broken heart.
Yeah, broken heart, right? Nehemiah doesn't have an evil heart, the way we would think of it. Now,
Steve,
this is,
So
yeah.
in the prior, the Proverbs verse, the King James used broken tooth.
Yeah.
Broken is used
Right.
in both of those.
Right, yeah, yeah. Now, this is a common challenge for all biblical translations. And we've touched on this before. But this scholar wants to complicate what the Hebrew, he is arguing that the Hebrew word rosh probably should not be translated as evil. Let's go on to these last two because this word is used in relation to God. And here's where we really get into, some having to think a little bit. So somebody look up Isaiah 31:2, and then somebody else, Jeremiah 10:5.
I got Jeremiah.
Okay, who's got
I
Isaiah?
have it.
Okay, Joanne?
Yet he too is wise and can bring disaster. He does not take back his words. He will rise up against the house of the wicked, against those who help evil do. That's NIV 31:2.
Okay, yeah. I didn't check various versions there, so I'm not sure. Let's let that one sit. Let's go on to Jeremiah 10:5. This article says the word rosh there is used in relation to God, but there it sounds like it's the evildoers, not God. But I haven't thought about that.
He can bring disaster.
Disaster is probably the word there. Yeah,
Bring disaster.
yeah. So bring rosh, bring disaster. Yeah. Jeremiah 10:5.
So this is the NIV. It says, like a scarecrow in a cucumber field, their idols cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot walk. Do not fear them. They can do no harm, nor can they do any good.
Okay, again, I lifted his references, so I have to be honest, I'm not sure, but he was making the point that this word that we often translate evil into English is used in relation to God. And I mean, we know this in other ways because the biblical worldview is that God, who is creator of all, is really ultimately in charge of all. And so there is a character in the Bible of attributing all things to God. The Bible does not accuse God of doing wrong, but it's pretty frank in sort of laying these evils at God's feet because God is in charge of everything. There's some nuance there that reading scripture we would have to work with. All right. Anyway, that is hopefully not too confusing answer to the question about what is the Hebrew word for evil.
Is there a different word for moral? Evil, moral? What's the word? Moral.
Yeah. I mean, you could say wickedness, but again, it has other connotations. Yeah, so we don't, the Bible never attributes wickedness to God, but the Bible can say that these evils that happen to people ultimately come from God's sovereign power and authority. Again, there's a There's a fine distinction that has to be kept in mind there, because what the Bible's doing is it's attributing all power to God, and there's no other God, there's no competing power with God. And so, but the Bible always stops short of saying, well, it's God's fault then, right? And God is culpable of evil. It never says that, even though it does use that word evil in relation to some of God's actions. So, all right, well, let's move on to wisdom. And I'd like to prime the pump of this discussion by using Benjamin Franklin. I didn't get to Aesop's fables, so we're just going to do a couple of Benjamin Franklin's quotes. I have 2 quotes here from the Poor Richard's Almanac. So Ben Franklin says, or Poor Richard says, "Who is rich? He that rejoices in his portion." So let's unpack this a little bit, translate it into common sense terms. What's being said there?
Whoever's happy with what he's got.
So be happy with what you got. Right. Have you heard something like this before? I can
He
hear
with
my
the most toys.
Sorry,
He with
Larry?
the most toys. He with the most toys wins.
No.
Yeah, that's the modern kind of counterexample, right? He that rejoices in his portion. So it doesn't matter how much you possess, if you're happy with it, that's what it means to be truly rich. I've heard it said this way, a person's wealth can be measured by the abundance of possessions or the fewness of wants. Okay, let's see what Jesus says. Not Jesus, sorry, that's the next one down, sorry. Let's look at Proverbs 8, 10, and 11. Somebody read 10 and 11 for us,
I will.
okay?
Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her.
Okay, so what's the point in these 2 verses about richness or wealth?
They're not material.
Okay. Yeah. Compared to wisdom, which is better, a lot of gold or a lot of wisdom?
Wisdom.
Yeah. Okay, are these 2, is the proverb simply saying what Ben Franklin is saying?
I think it's the same thing.
Well, Solomon prayed for wisdom and he got gold too.
Lucky him. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And he lost God's favor.
Yeah, eventually that's right. So is Ben Franklin just in a sense rewording what the Proverbs is saying?
I don't think so.
Okay, what do you see there,
Well,
Joanne?
what I see is, who is rich, he that rejoices in his portion, is kind of passive. Whatever you got, praise God. I'm happy with this.
Yeah.
Whereas the proverb seems to say it's much more active. You choose me, you choose wisdom instead of all of this other stuff. So it's much more conscious decision as opposed to, gee golly gosh, you get what, you won the lottery or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is that he who is rich, that person who rejoices in his portion, could have no wisdom or understanding. Could just be simple
Just
satisfaction
luck of the
with
draw.
satisfaction with what I got.
Kind of a dumb guy, doesn't know any better.
Or doesn't have high aspiration.
Okay, so lazy. Apathetic. Yeah,
Just-
you're really winning me over, Jody. Yeah,
Okay.
let me, yeah,
But
Forrest.
Jesus said, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye and a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven. So
Yeah.
basically that I'm saying, you know, you don't want to worry about being rich. Maybe rejoice, but don't worry about the rich.
Yeah, okay. Good, this is good. Now, we are now modeling what the Proverbs want us to do. We don't get to, most of the time, we don't get to the quick and easy conclusion. The Proverbs want us to mull things over. So that's what we're doing here. All right, if I asked, what is in these two statements, the one from Ben Franklin, the one from the book of Proverbs, what is the object of attachment in each of these sayings?
So the he who is rich, and then the one we just read out of
Yeah,
Proverbs.
from Proverbs, yeah.
Wealth, I mean, attributes of wealth.
Or contentment.
Okay, contentment, let's work with that for just a second. If I try to think about contentment, who is the object there for contentment? Who's the reference point for contentment?
Me. Benjamin Franklin's object is the person, the man, me, myself, and I.
My own self, right, so, okay, good.
And the proverb is something outside of oneself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's personified as wisdom, but it's only knowledge.
Yeah, so we desire wisdom, we pursue wisdom. We like gold, don't we, Larry?
Sure.
We like gold, but we want wisdom more, right? So the object of our affection, our desire is wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So the Lord is in that picture about wisdom. So whereas Ben Franklin is Franklinly, forgive me, self-interested. Now, what we've got here with Franklin's aphorism is a kind of stoicism, which is to discipline our passions so that we don't feel overwhelmed by anything. We don't get ourselves into emotional trouble by wanting something so much that then if we don't get it, we're horribly disappointed, we're broken down, etc., etc. So my point here is it matters the kind of wisdom we're pursuing.
The thing is that okay, so the Proverbs 8:10-11 can be compared to, but what Ben Franklin says, but I feel like there are other things in Proverbs that are closer to what Ben Franklin has said than Proverbs 8:10-11. I mean, it sounds very much. I can't give you an example, but my point is, it sounds very much like what we're reading.
This is my point. I think it sounds on first look, it appears to be very much like what we're reading.
Right.
Now, again, the background for the book of Proverbs is these are sayings collected, and the goal is this older generation, the teacher, the parents want to help the younger generation grow up to live well. We could say the same thing about Ben Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac, right? Imagine all the colonial children and, early Republic children who are learning about life from Ben Franklin. And, Christian parents can mix in the Bible with Ben Franklin and it all kind of sounds the same.
God helps those who help
There
themselves.
you go. That's in the book of Proverbs, right? No, it's not. So the point here is wisdom doesn't look exactly the same to everybody all the time. That's an obvious truth in a way, but it really matters who you're listening to. It matters because these things can sound superficially very similar, but they turn out to have quite different goals. Ben Franklin's goal is he wants to live well, and living well means you curb your desires and your inclinations so as to avoid the problems associated with not curbing. Now, there's truth in this, right? There's truth in it. But the emphasis, at least in this one, and I think with a lot of his sayings in Poor Richard's Almanac, which, by the way, I could be proven wrong on this because I'm, I have only a shallow understanding or knowledge of it. But the idea here is detachment. You figure out what's wrong, what should be avoided, and then you discipline your feelings so that you don't get caught up in wanting something that then could kind of throw you psychologically out of balance.
But then so much of what he emphasizes is material, as in wealth, penny saved is a penny earned, all kinds of things like that. So,
right, because all these people were coming to America for self-improvement reasons, right? They wanted better material conditions. Right. They wanted a chance to own property and build a life. Yeah. Joanne,
Aesop's not like that. Aesop's not like that necessarily. I think of immediately the race, the turtle and the hare, or the ant and the what is it? The other insect, the one that gobbles his food, during the summertime and doesn't save it. And there's much more moral teachings there.
Right. Right. Okay, Joanne, you were looking like you had a thought.
Yeah, I did. Now it's gone. Well, it was a good thought too, but no, that's all right. Really.
Okay. All right, well, let's do this other one then. Deny self for self's sake. This is another of Poor Richard's wisdom.
Well, it's not very clear how self benefits from self-denial from that.
Well, if you put it with the other one, you can start to infer, right, that there's a good reason to deny self, because again, if you just indulge yourself all the time, then, there's a kind of obvious level of, that's going to lead to problems, but it's the practice of disciplining your emotions so that you can live a balanced and serene life. Deny self for self's sake. Let's look at Matthew 16:24. What does that say?
And Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me.
Okay, here's self-denial, right? What's the aim, the object, the goal?
To be Christ-like?
Yeah, to follow Christ. So it's not for self's sake.
Right.
So there's something kind of self-contradictory, even though, again, we can commonsensically get to what Ben Franklin is saying, but at another level, it sort of unravels itself. So I can deny self for self's sake because I have this better version of myself that I want to live toward. So I'll deny myself temporarily on this or that thing, but it's still about the self. I want to better myself. I want to improve myself.
But it's
And
still
Jesus addresses that in the very next verse.
what does he say?
For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it.
Right. Yeah. Joni?
I don't know, just the deny self for self's sake. It isn't clear what he's thinking. How does self benefit from being denied?
Well, again, I think we can think of very clear-cut examples of where this is if you think about, for example, so here's what comes to mind. Have you ever watched any of these videoed experiments with small children about delayed gratification?
Mm.
You know, so the experimenter puts you know, a really desirable toy or maybe a candy bar or something like that in front of the 5-year-old kid and says to the kid, now I'm going to leave the room and I want you not to eat this candy bar until I get back. So then they leave, you know, and the kid sits there struggling with the desire to eat the candy bar. And I'm not getting the experiment exactly right. There's more condition to the experiment. So we could talk about delayed gratification, I think, in a way that matches or approximates what Ben Franklin's saying here. Right? But so I'm going to deny in this moment what I really want right now because I know there's a better something for me down the road.
And that's okay.
It is. It's perfectly fine.
But that does not reflect
This.
Jesus.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, how does it not reflect Jesus? And I think this is a very important principle for people who follow Jesus, right? So what then is the point of what Jesus is saying?
You won't get diabetes from eating the candy bar.
That's still pretty self-centered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's good. It's good to not want diabetes, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
How it's for self's sake, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so the object in the deny self and follow me is really to be in vital contact with God, which leads to giving our lives away. Now we can work with this concept or thought and wind up back pretty close to Ben Franklin. And I want to be careful about something here that I won't bring up, but I feel something lurking out here, some thought lurking. So, but if there's some Christian spiritual discipline that I know I should do, but I don't really want to do it, but then I go ahead and do it, and I have a good experience, it feels good, then if my motive becomes, well, now I know that I'm going to feel good if I do that, so I'll do it, so then I'll feel good. That's a kind of self-interest that doesn't really match what the Bible says. Now, there's nothing wrong with feeling good, but if we make that the object, I go to this conference because I want to have a certain kind of experience, right? Then that's slipping in the direction of a sort of a self-interested attitude that goes against what Jesus is saying about self-denial. Now, I admit to you what I'm saying isn't really all that clear. We're sort of slipping around back and forth on these thoughts. But again, I tell you, this is what the wisdom material challenges us to do, to kind of sit with these things and think about them and mull them over. And, you know, on the one hand, it looks this way, but on the other hand, it looks this way. And there's, I think, a very important point. Even if I never come to a perfectly clear conclusion on this particular question, whatever that question is. The process of working it over, mulling it over, is itself formative. And we wind up drawing closer to God, even if on that particular question, I can't get a perfectly clear answer that kind of satisfies me intellectually. And there's a lot in the wisdom literature that's like that, where it's the struggle of the process that is itself formative. Now, I'm gonna sound like I'm contradicting myself, but again, this is a little hobby horse for me, and I can't resist the temptation. I am not saying what we often hear when people say, it's the journey, not the destination. I'm not saying that. Nobody goes on a journey and says, well, I don't really care if I ever get there. You know?
Or I don't even know for sure where I'm going.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, okay.
Yeah.
I'll get off that hobby horse. So we don't have to belabor this. We need to move on. The goal of Franklin's saying is kind of a self-improvement, self-interest, good stuff, good reasons to be self-focused. The goal of Jesus' sayings, love
Thanks to
God.
God.
Yeah, love God. And I always think of C.S. Lewis in this context. There's this paradox about faith and the Christian life. The less I think about myself, the more I'm thinking about others, the more love and joy I can experience. If I concentrate on being happy, happiness is always elusive. If I concentrate on what God says we're to concentrate on, happiness is kind of like a byproduct. It follows along with me, but I'm not really focusing on it or concentrating on it, and yet it's there. Joy is there. And I think that's true. I mean, I think I can bear witness to that, even though my feelings, my emotional states can do this. I can be happy, I can be upset, I can, all those things, but underneath is a kind of hopefulness that's there because of God and being focused on that instead of on making sure I've got myself worked out. Okay, let's have a little fun. Let's look at the loose woman. Okay, first of all, Proverbs 5, 1 through 6. Now this is context. I asked you to read 8 and 9. So this is still context, but Proverbs 5, 1 through 6 first. Would somebody read those 6 verses?
You sure you want to hear it?
King James, let's try it.
Through 6, right?
Yep.
My son, attend unto my wisdom, and bow thine ear to mine understanding, that thou mayest regard discretion, and that thy lips may keep knowledge. For the lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil. But her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold on hell. Lest thou shouldest ponder the path of life, her ways are movable, that thou canst not know them.
Okay, so the strange woman is in my New Revised Standard that I use most of the time, is loose woman. What other words there are used for this woman?
Adulteress.
Adulterous woman, okay.
Mysterious.
Mysterious. Aha, intriguing. All right.
I thought in the New Revised Standard it was foreign.
Not here, not in this verse.
Okay.
Okay, let's go on to Proverbs 7, and it's really the whole chapter. So immediately preceding Lady Wisdom, the chapter on wisdom, we get this chapter on the loose woman. So I pulled out these quotes from it, and I shortened them, so I'm leaving out clauses, but in verses 3 and 4, say, say to you wisdom. I know that's not right. Say to wisdom, you are my sister. Notice these kind of relationships that are being used here. You are my sister. And then the intervening comments there, that they may keep you from the loose woman. So these words of wisdom, words from wisdom. There's the loose woman. And then in 24 through 27, what I pulled out was, for many are those she has laid low. So you've got a whole chapter on this adulterous woman who's trying to entice these young men to come and enjoy pleasures with her. And then in the very next chapter, we get this picture of lady wisdom, I'll call her, because it's put in the feminine gender. But before we get to lady wisdom, why do you think in these first chapters of Proverbs, there's so much attention to the loose woman or the adulteress?
Well, it appeals to the baser instincts of men.
Okay, it does that. Yes, it does that. It does that. Is there any other reason? Remember this, the Proverbs are poetic language. So we can get the straightforward, and that's of course necessary and important, but there's most of the time there's more. And now I'm asking us to contrast in that sense chapter 7 of Proverbs with chapter 8. If I ask this question, what do you think the loose woman symbolizes or maybe represents?
Unfaithfulness. The diversion from straight path, the diversion from, for these people, probably the law, the easy way. Plus the law.
Yeah.
So certainly for a young man, the kind of literal reading of these verses shows the problem that young men often have. I think it's a little, I found myself asking, Ollie, was it that big a problem? Was it like there a prostitute on every other corner? I was trying to imagine the background here, the cultural historical background. And I've never done any sort of study on prostitution in the ancient world, so although maybe I should.
But the
Yes.
thing is that we don't, when we read chapter 8, I don't think we think of wisdom as a real female person. Wisdom is, just a female term or pronoun is used to, but it's not a person. But so why do we treat chapter 7 as if the loose woman or the whatever is a person? Because
it talks about the loose woman.
Well, it talks about wisdom as a she.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, but I don't know. I guess I feel like what might be the case is that the loose woman is a is the word euphemism for something that isn't really just loose women. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And what is that, right? What is it?
Yeah.
So,
it's letting your desire drive you, and it's which I guess is maybe what Ben Franklin was saying.
So stealing.
Yeah,
Cheating,
being foolish and
lying,
falling for it, for lies and
killing. I mean,
Yeah.
all of that.
Well, part of the
But, yeah.
10 Commandments are for the family. So the family will be a happy unit and prosper, and continue. And I
Right.
think these are the same things.
Yeah. Yeah, and it requires commitment and faithfulness, right? Yeah.
The one thing that's really interesting in that verse 10 is not the dress like a prostitute, but the crafty intent.
Yeah,
And one wonders what that is.
yeah,
Well,
Well, isn't it?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
I was just thinking that the Solomon is all about discernment and wisdom, at least in this point stage of his life. But then after him, the Israelites as a whole are attracted more to the other cultures and the other religions there, and they're disregarding Yahweh
Right,
in many ways.
yeah.
Is that getting at what you're getting at?
Yeah, and if we think about, and this is why the literal reading is really good for starting places, because we can imagine, okay, what is the problem with being an adulteress? It's really not so much about the sex part, you know? We kind of fixated on that a lot of times in our culture, but to me, the problem with the adulteress is that she's not faithful to the covenant she made with her husband.
Right.
And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of the prophet Hosea, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole Old Testament book that uses the lived out parable of a woman who's unfaithful to her husband. And so faithlessness to a covenant. I promise you, I'm going to be faithful to you. And then, like the adulterous woman, then I just go my merry way. And so my promise really means nothing. What happens to a society, a culture where promises of faithfulness, whether it's marriage or anything else, are broken easily?
This presages the breakup of the nation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Israel being taken into battle, or no, Israel being conquered and dispersed. And you know, God says, Israel, I had to divorce you. I gave you. Which,
Yeah.
you know, that's the lowest. I mean, what worse can you be? So here, Solomon is trying to teach these people, no, don't do that.
Yeah. 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 And all those enticements, whatever they are, all those enticements that want to lead us away from our covenant relationship with God, inevitably get us in trouble. They wind up in death, right? Okay, well, that's a taste of it. So again, sort of mulling over why all this attention to the loose woman or the adulteress, right? In these proverbs, it's more than about just these young men have trouble, not being enticed away by adulteresses or whatever. There's just more going on. Yeah, Joni.
So I feel like there's some of the part about wisdom with the feminine pronoun that almost seems seductive, like the way the language is written. It's like very desirable, kind of.
Come to my house. My husband's away. We can have a lot of fun.
Wisdom.
Oh, sorry.
Not
Oops.
the part you read about wisdom sounds that way. Like she also is a desirable.
Here's the problem, Joni. The problem is you're ahead of me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
Of course. But yeah, but in a way, it's the reason for the woman as a kind of symbol of what we're talking about, right? You get those, that's the word seduction is what got me there. You can feel the allurement of whatever draws us away from God. And using these kind of concrete expressions related to the loose woman helps us feel that allurement rather than just a rule. You know, I could give you a rule, stay away from X, Y, or Z. But if I'm a person who wants to live a good life and I feel the power of the temptation, so this metaphorical language helps. Okay, now to wisdom. So you're seeing that kind of allurement or seduction?
Yeah,
Seduction is a word, I mean,
It's
seduction is tricky.
yeah, I don't mean seduction in the term, in the sense that it's, um, what's the word? Dishonest.
Right.
Yeah,
That's why, to me, a word like alluring, where
okay.
you're really,
Fair enough.
seduction, there's
Mhm.
an element of trickiness or deception with seduction or manipulation,
There you go, yeah. Yeah,
that I don't think you want with Lady Wisdom.
right. I guess it's just the almost, I don't even know, the desire of seeking out wisdom and understanding is, the terms are so strong, so powerful, that it feels,
Yeah,
I know I'm not saying
Yeah.
what I think, what I want to say, but it just feels, okay, alluring is maybe the right word,
Yeah.
but it's,
right,
yeah,
yep.
sorry, can't figure out how to say it.
Okay, well, there's really a lot here. So what I've tried to do for the purpose of our discussion, let's look at verses 32 through 36 in chapter 8 of Proverbs. And get a sense of what's being said there. And then let's go back to chapter 7 and compare the picture we see in 13 through 20. So 8, 32 through 36. And we could have done this a number of different ways with different sections of readings.
Is, sorry, is in the chapter 8, whatever verses you just gave us, 32, 30 through 36,
Yeah.
that's wisdom speaking?
Yeah, this is
Okay.
wisdom all through chapter 8.
Okay.
For example, verse 34, I'm reading Common English Bible. Happy are those who listen to me, watching daily at my doors, waiting at my doorposts. Now, compare that to this adulterous woman who's inviting the young man, come to my house,
Pretty flagrant.
There's a little bit of a symmetry here between the enticement of the loose woman and the appeal of wisdom. There's a kind of a symmetry. They're not the same. They're actually opposing in their outcomes. But the appeal, and this is both, there's a dimension of this image that is related to God, because wisdom is a stand-in for God here. God's law, God's righteousness, God's order, God's goodness. Wisdom is a stand-in for God. So, but there's also something about the way we are designed as human beings created in God's image. So wisdom is appealing to that aspect of us that reflects the image of God. So our feeling drawn toward wisdom or drawn toward God matches the way we're created. It's really living the way we're made to live, or at least the desire to live that way. And as Larry mentioned earlier, again, the adulterous woman, that's appealing to a baser desire, a real desire. It's kind of a perverse version of the God-created desire.
Yeah.
And I think this is why taking the time to ponder over and think through, when I start getting into thoughts like I just tried to share. And this is, this is me as a practicing Christian trying to understand and live in a certain way. That kind of gets down to, so, there are these two paths that the Bible's very clear about in wisdom literature. There's the way of righteousness, there's the way of wickedness, there's the way of blessedness, there's the way of death, right? Destruction.
You can certainly see, just looking at these two chapters, though, the emphasis on sensuality and just base desire in chapter 7, why the Puritans would have pushed that away. I mean, if you compare the two, that's the one thing in chapter 7 that's just blatant.
Yeah.
It's very, very frank.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time, but let's look at chapter 9, and we'll finish this next week and get on to the other thing I want to do. But let's look at the first 6 verses of chapter 9. And then look at 13 through 17. Again, this kind of comparison and contrast. Again, this appeal, the invitation, come drink my wine, come to my table, enjoy my banquet. There's a kind of parallel with the loose woman here. And then look at 13 through 17. Yeah. Now, this isn't advice. It's not telling us exactly what to do in a given situation. I mean, there's a level of that, If the situation is, I'm being propositioned, I know what I'm supposed to do, right? That's very clear. But what about all these, what we might call gray areas, where the circumstances are a lot more subtle and there's a lot more at stake, and it's more spiritual problems. And one that comes to mind is in some of our church difficulties, when members of the same denomination want to characterize their opponent in the most negative possible way, and they're willing to kind of bend the truth a little bit for the sake of what they consider a just cause. I'm thinking about things like that, where it kind of gets down to where I live, where I feel vulnerable, and if I stop and think about it, I can see the right way, and I know some of these strategies are wrong, but I really want this other thing. That what I want and what I know to be right kind of don't match up perfectly. And so that's where I'm asking us to think about, where do we feel a little vulnerable? What are some situations or circumstances that where these proverbs might really help us think about how to understand what is going on in our hearts? That's really the.
I think that's a better way of thinking, even of the loose woman, because it's easy to read that chapter and think, well, that's not going to entice me. I don't have
not my problem. Yeah.
And yet at the same time, I might be tempted to mischaracterize someone just a little bit because it feels good.
Yeah.
It looks enticing. There are all kinds of things that aren't about prostitution,
right.
Literally. That are easy to overlook if you think too much about just the loose woman. You miss the whole thing of what does really allure us and call us in and try,
right. Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a little bit more to do. I have something, there's something from Jesus' sayings that I want us to look at. We'll save that till next week. Now, I do need to get to my slide that has the, there it is. For next time, let's read Proverbs 20.
Gotta share your screen again.
Proverbs 20 is I didn't really want to share anymore, so I'll save that for next.
Okay.
I was trying to remember what I worked up as the assignment. So Proverbs 20. So we'll finish what we started tonight, and then we'll look at Proverbs 20 next week. And you all be thinking about what you'd like to do next, and text me, call me, email me, tell me, whatever.
How many weeks are we planning to do the next?
I'm sorry, I'm not,
You just have it.
it would be a few weeks, yeah, because if we did the Protestant Reformation, for example, we could go forever about it, or we could do 3-4 weeks. Yeah, it kind of depends on what you all want and where it goes.
Okay.
So be thinking and give me your suggestions, and we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Bye-bye.